Shalom, and welcome to a message for the Parsha for Parshat Emor. Emor means say. It begins with Hashem spoke to Moshe, and he said to him, Emor el ha-Kohanim b'nei Aharon. Say to the Kohanim, the children of Aaron, the priests, who are the children and the lineage of Aaron, Ve'amarta alehem, and you shall say to them, Lenefesh lo yitama be'amav, they should not defile their spiritual pureness by becoming in contact with anything impure. And then it goes into detail in telling us in what instances a Kohen is allowed to, quote, defile his purity, or not only allowed, but is obligated to, and that is when, God forbid, someone from the next of kin passes away, then they have to participate in the funeral. They have to come in contact because that overrides even their purity. And for the time being that they are impure, they're obviously not going to be fit for doing the service in the Holy Temple. And then they would purify themselves and go back to it. So the interesting question is, if you notice in the first verse, it said twice. It said say to them, and then it says, and you shall say to them. And of course, the sages explain this. What do they tell us? That this is, quote, lehazhir gedolim alaktanim. There's a double saying over here. It's almost as if there's two commandments here, to speak to the Kohanim and then to speak. What is this about? The sages tell us it is to, quote, lehazhir, which literally translates to warn. In other words, to instruct the elders, but not just the elders, but to instruct the elders and charge them with the obligation of taking care of the youngsters. Meaning that the adults need to see to it that also the youth and the young children also adhere to these rules. Now, of course, it's very interesting. We know that when it comes, for example, to the 5 books of the Torah, absolutely and most certainly every word, not only every word, but every letter, every nuance is accounted for. There's no such thing as a superfluous expression. But the truth is, even though the Talmud was not written so exact, but still, when there is a choice of words, when there's a choice of expression, that in itself is very, very telling. Notice that the sages said over here, not, quote, to instruct. This is to tell us that the double saying is to instruct the adults over the children, but rather they use the term lehazhir, which means to warn. Why? Why did they choose this expression? The Rebbe explains something very, very insightful, and it's actually very powerful and very encouraging. You see, sometimes it may seem that the fact that we are charged with teaching the next generation, teaching the, quote, children, the young, and perhaps by extension, especially in nowadays, those who are learned, those who do have an awareness of our beautiful heritage and tradition, when we have to go out there and teach those that perhaps in terms of knowledge are very young, are like maybe like little babies, they don't know anything about their Judaism. And it may seem like such a burden. It may seem like such an obligation. Such a difficult task. Why would I want to engage in it? Why would I want to spend my time and my effort, my energy in doing that when I can now, instead, in that time, be engaged in my own self-improvement, in my own growth, in my own spiritual and emotional ascent? Why would I want to do it? The sages tell us, lehazhir. The word lehazhir also comes from the root word Zohar, just like the book of Zohar, which means to shine, to glow. What the sages are telling us is, when the Torah instructs us, Emor va'amarta, say and say, which is telling us there's 2 sayings here. There's a saying to the adult, and there's a saying to the adults, how they should speak and say and pass it on to the children and take charge of their spiritual future. And like I told you, by extension, those who are like children who don't know anything about their Judaism. The sages tell us this is lahazhir. This is not just for their benefit, which is in itself a virtue and enough to convince most of us to do it, but this is for your benefit. You will shine. Lahazhir gedolim. That the gedolim, the adults, the grown ones will shine. That in order for them to shine, al haktanim, on the account of the young ones, of the small ones. So when we teach others, we're not just doing them a favor. In fact, we're doing ourselves the biggest favor. And that's what Hashem incorporated in this Torah. That when you help another Jew, when you teach another Jew, when you teach a child, you teach somebody who's like a child, you shine, you grow, you become now so much more illuminating and just sparkling, both in your soul and in your emotions and in your intellect and in your entire being. And another interesting point is that the approach of how to do it is also incorporated in the exact choice of words that the Torah chose. And that is, typically it says, Daber el bnei Yisrael. Speak to the children of Israel. Here it says, Emor, say. We know that there are various expressions in the Torah when it comes to speech, and typically the distinction is that speaking, Daber, or lahagid, is somewhat of a rough, more of a commendative type of tone, a commendative type of voice. Whereas Emor, saying, is the softest of speech. And the Torah is telling us, when you're going to speak, whether it's to adults, especially to children, especially to those who are maybe not yet educated and well versed in Judaism, say it in a pleasant way. Say it in a soft manner. Emor, ve'amarta, say it to them. And then they will shine. And moreover, you will shine.